morning, all. Sorry about that.
Morning, Counselor. Brad Swing should also be a panelist. David Musselman was not able to make it, so Brad is representing the energy team. If he's not on your list. Oh, there he is. I see him.
Yeah, I just let him in. Can you just give me Brad's title?
Director of Energy Policy and Programs.
Great. Thank you, Brad. Let me just let counselors know that we're in now. Good morning. Happy Monday.
Morning.
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 Good morning, everybody.
Hi. Buenos días.
Buenos dias. All right. Well, just because I told everybody to hang tight while we were getting that fixed, I'm just going to give people a couple minutes to get in. But Reverend Whitehammond, you have everyone from your team that you need?
Excuse me?
Do you have everyone from your team in the Zoom that you need?
Yes, I believe everyone that's supposed
All
to
right,
be.
so we'll just give my colleagues a couple more minutes because of the technical difficulties, and then we'll get going.
Great.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Mr. President. Did you have a good first Mother's Day with Catherine?
Sure did. It was perfect. Thank you.
Great. Okay. And Candace, we're all set on our end? See, we're live?
We're all set, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. I think since we've got a busy day ahead then, I'm going to get going. I'm calling this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor and also the chair of the Council's Ways and Means Committee. This hearing is being recorded. It's being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. This hearing is part of the Council's budget review process, which encompasses about 35 working sessions and hearings focused on every aspect of the City of Boston's FY22 budget. And we strongly encourage residents to take a moment to engage in this process by sharing public testimony. So I know we've got some folks signed up already. If you're interested in signing up for public testimony, you can go to boston.gov/budget-testify to find out how, or you can see all of the hearings and figure out which one you might want to testify at boston.gov/council-budget. If you need help finding any of those things, or you want to send us some written testimony, you can go to ccc.wm@boston.gov. That's the email address to reach us, ccc.wm@boston.gov. And we also, on the website, you can also, there's an opportunity to upload a video. We do ask you that you do that 48 hours in advance of hearings, but then we can actually append them to the end of a hearing like this one. And we'll also be having 2 remaining hearings that are totally dedicated to public testimony. So at 6 p.m. on May 25th, we'll have one focused on the BPS budget, and we'll start straight with public testimony right away. That's 6 on May 25th. And then on June 3rd, we'll have another one at 6 about all aspects of the budget. So sort of anything that you've heard or feel like hasn't been addressed. And then you can informally tweet us your questions or comments using the hashtag BOSSBudget, BOS budget as well. And I'll give one more time, the website for the whole council budget review process is boston.gov/council-budget. So we do hope you'll join us and get involved. The budget gets better through public input every year. So today's hearing is on dockets 0524 to 0526, orders for the FY22 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Docket 0527 to 0528, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. Docket 0529 to 0531, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. And then docket 0538 to 0539, orders authorizing limits for Environment Department revolving funds for FY22. So today we'll be focusing on the Environment Department and under the auspices of the Environment Department, also the Conservation Commission and the Landmarks Commission, both of which do really important work on conservation and our historical preservation work. And then we'll also be talking to Environment about their revolving funds for distributed energy resources and the Conservation Commission. So it's my pleasure to welcome to the virtual chamber for the first time the Reverend Mariama White Hammond, our new Chief of Energy, Environment, and Open Space. I know the whole council's very excited to hear from her. And on her team, Carl Spector, the Commissioner for the Environment Department, Allison Brizius, the Director of Climate and Environmental Planning, and Brad Swing, our Director of Energy Policy and Programs. I'm so thrilled to have the team here with us. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Councillor Anissa Sabi-George at large, Councillor Ed Flynn from District 2, Councillor Liz Braden from District 9, Councillor Julia Mejia at large, and Councillor Matt O'Malley, District 6, and Council President Pro Tempore. I think that is.
Excuse me, Councillor.
Yes.
Oh, excuse me, Councillor. Also joining is Rosanne Foley, the Director of Historic
I'm so
Preservation.
sorry. Yes, critical. Rosanne Foley, who is the Executive Director of our Landmarks Commission, is here with us. And I think I also missed Councillor Andrea Campbell, who is the District 4 councillor, so also here with us. So I think that's everybody. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Chief White Hammond to kick us off.
Thank you, Councillor. I first want to thank you for the opportunity to come before you today. I have been before you a few times in the past, but never in this role. I've had the opportunity to work with many of you as an advocate and look forward to working with you more in this new role. I want to thank you for your thoughtful questions. Even though I am a pastor and I could certainly go on for a while, I'm going to keep my remarks short and focus on some big picture questions. And I know there were a number of questions about the specifics of different pieces of our work, and I will actually defer and allow staff to sort of name and speak to some of those with greater specificity. But I want to acknowledge that this is the beginning of my third week, and the first 2 weeks I spent listening to staff. We had an anonymous survey that gave folks an opportunity to share some feedback, and I am now at the beginning of going into deeper conversations with other cabinets and departments. And I have meetings with a number of you over the coming weeks as I try to understand how folks outside of our department see us and opportunities for deeper collaboration. Again, as I mentioned, much of my response is based on the feedback I received from our anonymous surveys, which was sent to all the environment staff and parks leadership, conversations with commissioners and department heads, and a response to your questions, which were submitted by the department heads, where they will go into greater depth on specific programs and work. I do want to note that our goal over this next year is to really go deeper into a people-centered focus as a cabinet. We have done really great projects and initiatives. You know of them. We lead the country in many areas and have been groundbreaking on many fronts. And now our work is to go deeper in our engagement with the public, and particularly to center our most vulnerable residents, engaging them in the work of reimagining who Boston can be, both as a community of people and a environmental space that everybody needs to have access to equally and justly. So I know we have done really good progress. I heard from multiple staff about the work that's been done to increase our use of community advisory groups, panels, boards, to bring folks into the work. The strides that have been made in our departments to make our meetings more accessible, having more language support. So we've already gotten started, and our work over this next year is to go deeper in that work because we want to make sure that the entire city of Boston is engaged in this. Our most vulnerable residents, not just in terms of their vulnerability to sea level rise, but many of our residents are deeply vulnerable to heat and other climate impacts, and they should be at the table engaged in that conversation. We also are excited to be deepening our intercabinet collaboration. Again, another place where we have worked with every department under the sun. We have to. We are small, and the only way for us to be mighty is if we also work with other folks who have other important resources. But we want to look at how we systematize those relationships a little bit more and go deeper in our conversations. I just had a great conversation with Chief Martinez this morning about how we can do more to connect our work with HHS and the great work that they're doing there. I do want to name a couple of highlights that were brought up in the questions that I think are worth noting. There were a couple of questions about issues of staffing, and I want to note that wages clearly have been an issue for the Environment Department in the past. I want to celebrate the work particularly of Commissioner Spector, who led a process to get HR to review all of the salaries and make adjustments, which I think is going to be very, very important. We've had a lot of staff turnover, that is quite true. And some of that is because we have not been able to attract people at a salary that would lead them to stay with our department instead of seeking opportunities elsewhere. So we believe that this HR review and the adjustments of folks' salary classes will make a difference in being able to retain qualified staff. We also, I do want to note, it was raised by some of quite a few of our staff, is the delay of processing of candidates. Sometimes we have great candidates and we lose them because it can take us a while between interview to offer. And so I look forward to sitting down with HR to see how we can streamline that process just a bit so that we get the best and strongest staff. And there have been some departures during the pandemic. In the short term, that will be somewhat of a challenge for us in terms of capacity. But in the long term, I also think it creates an opportunity to strengthen the diversity of the department. We are aware that we could do more to reflect the demographics of the city of Boston, and that is something we take very seriously, and hope that, again, the stronger salaries and the openings, though they are a bit unfortunate, do give us an opportunity to make some big strides in the department. A number of you raised questions about landmarks and the need for more resources. And we are both recognizing that. We are really excited to have another staff position proposed in the upcoming budget. We believe that that will make a major difference. And we want to acknowledge that there are some of the departments that have grant-funded positions. I'm looking forward to a conversation with archaeology about how to sustain staff there that have been grant-funded. And I was excited to have a conversation with Rosanne Foley about what it would take to reduce the backlog of study reports by the end of the year. Multiple of you named the backlog that we have. And so while we are not ready to present something in this conversation, we'd love to have a follow-up conversation as she and I look at what that will take. Our understanding is that that will probably be a combination of some redirection of staff to focus on really moving that, but also require some fundraising, outside funds potentially, to help us bring in consultants that will help us move through that backlog. Having that many applications hanging over your head is like, coming home to a cluttered house. It gets to the point where it feels hard to be productive as long as that's hanging over you. And we want to make sure the goal is to try to see what we can do to reduce that backlog by the end of the year, and thankful that there is additional staff to hopefully prevent us once we can get through the backlog of continuing that in the future. A number of you also raised issues about Article 85. I will defer a bit to Rosanne and Carl to talk a little bit about some of the efforts there, but I do think that we, from what I understand from staff, are in a better place than we have been in a long time to really move Article 85 forward as something that could really help to support and sustain the naming of landmarks and the protection of our historic resources. Multiple of you named the fact that it is often true that by the time the process moves forward, sometimes the property has already been demolished. And so we recognize that that is a structural challenge that we've got to fix, because if we don't actually have the tools to save landmarks, then we will always be behind the 8 ball. Finally, I want to take a moment to address the question around green jobs, because that came up. And as you know, this is a new area. This is something that the mayor put in the upcoming budget. We're very excited about these resources. Want to just share a few high-level things. One is that we are excited by the scale of resources, and our intention is to begin some level of implementation over the next year. We do not want to spend a year just planning. We believe planning is important, but we also know that many of us have participated in conversations. Both, I know there's been great work done by folks on the council. I have also been engaged in this conversation recently as a member of the steering committee of Mass Renews, which was originally the National Green New, the statewide Green New Deal table, and also Renew New England, again, that takes its leadership from the Green New Deal. So very much looking forward to engaging you in this conversation. Have looked at a number of models. I know Councilor Black, you mentioned specifically the Philadelphia model, really exciting possibilities there. We also have folks reaching out to us from RCC and BFIT and want to engage folks in Madison Park. So our first goal is to put together a community advisory board, but we want to move that quickly and aggressively using some of the model of the way that the CCE work was done. I sat on that community advisory board, and we made sure that every meeting, when people showed up, there was clear information, clear decision-making points. And I would say our department did a great job. Now we can have a deeper conversation about the DPU and whether or not they have been the best partner in moving it forward. But I do think that that process was one where people were well engaged and we were able to move decisions well. And so I'm looking forward to working with some of you as members of that community advisory board as we figure out how to bring together primary ed and higher ed and labor, employers and advocates together to move this forward. And finally, I just want to note a couple of other quick foci that are not in the budget, and then we will jump right in. I just got off a call with HHS, looking forward to our engagement on issues of food justice. We also are highly already had a plan moving forward on heat, which we will continue in the process that we had, but also do some accelerated interventions this summer, specifically around some of our communities that are heavily hit by heat and have also been hit by COVID. We think there's an opportunity in the recovery work already planned for our neighborhoods to take both the research and the community advisory board already formed for heat and apply that right now to support residents as we try to recover from COVID. So I'm going to stop there because I have hit the time that I had anticipated, but I look forward to engaging in dialogue and digging in to some of the specifics that you raised.
Great, thank you so much, Chief White-Hammond. And yes, I should have said, obviously, welcome to the chamber in this role. Very well aware that you're familiar with it, if not in this virtual form. Prior. Did you mentioned a couple of things that maybe Commissioner Spector was going to speak to. Did anyone on your team want to say anything before I go to counselor questions, or should we have those things come out over the course of counselor questions?
So Commissioner Spector, did you want to add anything specific? We've gone through, we've taken all of your questions. We had a meeting on Friday to really go through them, and obviously prioritizing the voices of folks who work on the specific elements. So I know there were questions on everything from wetlands to Boston. So I think it makes the most sense to have the staff working directly on those, name it. But Commissioner Spector, did you also want to add some opening remarks?
No, let's move directly to questions. That's fine. Thank you.
All right, great, fantastic. Yes, and thank you so much for sending back the answers to those questions. I had the opportunity to review them and hope that other counselors have as well. I have lots of questions and follow-ups, but I'm gonna, as the chair, back cleanup. So I'll go first to my vice chair on Ways and Means, Councilor Sabi George at large. The one thing I'll just remind colleagues of, last week, we hadn't yet had any working sessions, and so, or 2 weeks ago when we were doing hearings. And so I sort of let people do the thing where you spend your entire time asking the questions, and then we get to the end of your time and there hasn't been any time for the departments to answer. Since in this instance, we've now had working sessions, I would appreciate it if counselors would, ask questions and leave some of your allocated time for us to hear back from the departments in that block. So. Councilor Sabi George, I'll trust you to model that first.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I hope to not disappoint. And thank you, Chief Mariama White-Hammond, for joining us today, and congratulations on this new role for you. I'd love it if you could talk a little bit more about the development and expansion of the Green Jobs Training Program and those partnerships. What are the types of partnerships you're looking for? And you mentioned this role of a community advisory board. What is the timeline for this? And when you put this together, what will the focus be on during that time? And actually, so just to model that good behavior, I'll leave it at those two questions first. Thank you.
Okay, great. So internally, we've talked about, and I'll say this, literally, we've had 1 week of beginning this conversation. So there are things that may certainly evolve over time. Because heat and food justice are both very summer dependent, they will have a shelf life and then be done. We will be giving particularly heat a strong priority over the summer. That being said, the goal would be to form the community advisory board possibly as early as the second week in June. That doesn't mean it will be closed. We had a deep conversation about wanting to get everyone at the table, but also wanting to move with some haste. So the idea was that we would begin pulling that advisory board together by June, and then have June, July, and August, both to put ideas together, get some consensus, and preferably release something in early September. We've talked a little bit about moving to some level of pilot. How do we make sure that resources can hit the ground? We do not want, it is very possible to spend a year planning, but the goal is how do we get some of those resources out into the community in short order? So I have already gotten outreach from folks at RCC and Ben Franklin. Those are the two places that have heard and are ready to go. I know I'll be in conversation with Councilor Bach, who reached out. Councilor Wu has also shared some information. And I'm trying to remember, there's someone, and looking forward to a conversation with Flynn, who's done quite a bit of work on the workforce development side of this. So the question is, how can we get everyone who's invested to the table in short order? It will be the responsibility of our department to make those meetings be less brainstorming and more decision-making oriented, because I think that's the only way we can get to some level of release by September 1st. So we're just hoping to build on what's already been done. So we won't be convening people starting at zero. There are a number of folks in the department who've worked on, Brad Swing has done some work to help BFIT at one point, I think it was to craft some curriculum. So there is some expertise already there. The big question is, how will we, there's a wide universe of what we could be working on. My thinking at this point, though I'm open, is that we're going to be looking at particularly young adults at the beginning of getting them on a green jobs pathway. That doesn't mean we won't look at anything else, but I'm guessing, as an example, we wouldn't be going all the way back to elementary.
Right.
We can get there at some point, but for right now, we'd be looking at young adults onboarding into green jobs.
So I love the relationship and the hope for a partnership with BFIT and RCC. Please don't forget about Madison Park, Voc Tech, and those are our young people, and making sure that they have, access and opportunity to these trainings and the partnerships, because there are some natural relationships between Madison Park and RCC and BFIT already. So let's build upon that.
So go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
The 3 schools that I already have on the list, I'm just being transparent. None of them have reached out to us yet. We will have to do the outreach to them. Is Madison and O'Brien. They're right there in that corridor and makes a lot of sense with the science focus. We feel like O'Brien should also, have some contribution. And then Boston Green Academy.
Right.
Those are 3 places that we know there have been conversations in this direction already. And so our job will be to have conversations with those 3 schools, sort of see where they already are. But yes, we are well aware that we need to make sure that our BPS schools are deeply engaged in this process.
Great, thank you. And I know BGA, I happened to talk with them last week, and they'd be a great partner as well in this. But I'd say, in order of importance, really making sure that Madison and those programs over there have access to this. And then very quickly, Madam Chair, if I could just ask about the Clean Air Community Grant Program. How much are those grants for, and how often will they be offered?
So I know Allison, could you address that?
Our first process. Allison, do you want to follow up about this in greater depth?
Sure. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, counselors. The Community Clean Air Grant opportunity was just launched. We're in the process of hosting webinars and one-on-one help sessions to help people through the process. The first deadline, we're accepting applications up through mid-June, but that's a rolling deadline. So we'll continue to accept applications and reevaluate them in September and later in the year. They're nominally up to $50,000 per application, but if you have a program or an idea that expands beyond that, we'd love to hear about it and talk about it with you. So we'd invite people to reach out with those ideas. This is really a learning year for the grant program. So we want to understand what's the community need and how we can adapt the grant program to meet that need.
And just anecdotally, I did have a conversation today with Chief Martinez, sort of noting that they have some folks who've been working on pollution and other EJ issues, and he said it made total sense that they'd have some ability just through the Health Commission and other parts of HHS to share that application more widely. So it's just come out, but we will make sure that we are leaving no stone unturned in terms of where we might find folks who are committed to this issue.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Asabi-George. Next up is Councillor Ed Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Bach. It's good to see Chief White Hammond and the other dedicated and professional city employees present. Thank you for the work you do. Chief, one issue that's a main priority for me since I've started on the council is the air pollution level in Chinatown. Highest air pollution of any neighborhood in Massachusetts, obviously for several reasons, right on top of the Mass Pike, right on top of the highway, close to Salt Station train, Salt Station bus, major truck routes from Maine to Florida, and in a dense residential area. I always felt like we're not doing enough in Chinatown on air pollution, and I'm frustrated, really. I'm really frustrated. I want to make sure that my constituents get the best health care and the best services they can on this issue. What can we do to work together on air pollution related issues in Chinatown?
So I have 2 responses to that. So first of all, I would love to sit down and go deeper to hear more about sort of where you've already, what things have already been explored. I do also know we won't talk about the urban forestry plan in this meeting. That will also be, that's a parks question. So I know we have an upcoming parks hearing too. So that's, I think, one part of the solution. But I do I think that obviously air pollution, I actually live in Dorchester, quite close to the highway. So I know in the winter, we can blow our nose and see the pollution in the tissue. And I know that is clearly not a good situation for our health. Commissioner Spector, do you wanna, or Allison, do you wanna talk about some of our specific initiatives while also recognizing we should sit down to go deeper to figure out?
Sure. Thank you, Counselor. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Counselor, for the question. So there's a long-term answer, of course, which is reducing the amount of traffic and reducing the amount of pollution coming from vehicles on the road. Of course, that's part of the goals of our climate plan and the Go Boston 2030 plan. And we work very closely with the Transportation Department and others to address that. Now, that's because most of the pollution, as you've noted, is from vehicles. So that is a long-term plan, and how we address the short term in the short term is much harder. Obviously, there are things that we do on the local roads, that there's the parking freeze that tries to reduce the amount of commuting into these neighborhoods and downtown neighborhoods. That also helps a little bit. We certainly advise when it comes up, when we have an opportunity about to developers of new projects about where they put their ventilation vents, to keep them away from the highway, the air intakes, things like that. That's frankly the extent of the authority that we have. If you have other ideas, or perhaps there will be other ideas that come out through the Community Clean Air Grants Program, we'd be very interested in looking at those, and of course working with you on that, both in the short and long term.
Thank you.
We'd love to also figure out if there are organizations that you think we should specifically be targeting in Chinatown. There are some. CPA is already involved in a number of our processes, but if there are other ways to make the clean air grants attractive, make people aware of them in the short term, it doesn't fix it all, but at least it means that we can be targeting the resources we do have to the communities that need them the most.
Yeah, thank you. I'd appreciate the opportunity to work with you. I always felt that basic city services in Chinatown were not always there. So that's what I want to do, is work closely with you to make sure we get more services in Chinatown, because it is frustrating to me, trying to get more basic city services and help into the community. So I hope we can work together on that. The second question. Oh, do you have?
Councilor Flynn, we just lost you. There you go.
Okay, I was having difficulties. Waterfront, the South Boston Waterfront, Fort Point, the Wharf District Council. What are we doing on climate resiliency, infrastructure changes or improvements in and around the Boston Harbor in those neighborhoods?
Great. I'll hand that over to Allison to share some of the interventions we've already been working on, and again, space for conversation as we work to deepen that.
Sure. Thank you, Chief. And thank you for the question, Counselor. I think, as you're aware, we've undertaken a series of specific coastal plans that look parcel by parcel along the coast to understand the flood pathways, and then work with the community and technical experts to develop the implementation plans, if they were, the implementation to-do list along the coast. We completed the South Boston and Seaport, North End and downtown last year, and are working through the last pieces of Charlestown and East Boston currently in an open process. But that doesn't mean that we're waiting for implementation. We've been moving forward with implementing those actions identified in those plans as opportunities arise, understanding where the most critical flood pathways are. So we've been working with the state MEMA and FEMA to develop and implement a set of flood protection along the Fort Point Channel. We're entering the last round. That was an application to FEMA. We're in the last round of review there and hope to have that officially accepted so that we can move into implementation shortly. We're pursuing that same process in East Boston along the harbor front, along the Lewis Street Mall, where we've moved with a grant from Coastal Zone Management at the state to a design and development process for passive flood protection barriers there that would close off major flood pathways into East Boston. We're also developing resilient parks, and happy to give you much more detail where we're elevating elements of McConnell Park, Langone, Popolo, Martins Park, as we do them in our capital planning to make sure that they are closing off major pieces of the flood pathways into those neighborhoods while continuing to provide access for public activity, public recreation within the park. So happy to give you more details on any specific elements of those if you're interested offline.
Thank you. One final question. Is that okay, Councilor Block?
If it's very brief, Councillor Flynn.
Oh, yeah, it will be very brief. Spanish speaking or Cantonese speaking employees at your department, how many do you have?
I believe we have no Cantonese speaking that I am aware of. And am I the only Spanish speaking? I think, is there? Yeah. So just so you know, that is one of our priorities in terms of hiring is having more folks in the department who have language fluency. So that is definitely on the list of places that we can improve. In the short term, also just doing a better job of having a relationship with the translation services that are available at the city, making sure that we provide that support on the front end so that more folks will want to join in. One other quick thing I'll note, in terms of this question around waterfront and a number of others, there are many instances where we know what needs to be done and we just need the resources to be able to implement some of these. And some of these are small projects and some of them are quite large. So one of the things that our staff will be working on over the coming weeks in anticipation both of COVID dollars that are being made available and the potential large infrastructure dollars that are being discussed at the federal level. I am a big Leslie Knope fan, and I think this job is the closest I'm ever going to get to being able to be like Leslie Knope. And one of her signature things is to have a binder. And so our goal is to have a binder that sort of breaks down the projects that we have, making it possible as resources are flowing into the city to make sure that we've prioritized what we're looking to do, what it will cost, having pre-conversations with other departments, which we need to work with so that as there's a possibility of some of the infrastructure dollars coming, we can propose those quickly and efficiently and move some of these projects forward.
Thank you. And I do hope your team is able to hire a Cantonese speaking person, hopefully soon. Thank you, Councilor Buck.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Next up is going to be Councillor Braden, then Councillor Mejia. And I just want to know that we were joined some time ago by Councillor Michael Flaherty at large and Councillor Lydia Edwards of District 1. Councillor Braden.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome. I thank you for the responses to the questions that we sent in. I really appreciate that. I would also, in terms of the air quality issue, the Mass Pike was driven through Alston, Brighton and Chinatown. Many people were displaced, and we still have a lot of folks who live in close proximity to the Mass Pike. I as the crow flies, I'm about half a mile away, and there's a lot of particulate matter that lands on our outdoor furniture, and I live a distance away. So again, when any conversation about air quality, I'd like to flag up the concerns of folks who live in Alston and along north of the Pike, especially because they're very, very close to a very huge level of traffic every day. The heat island effect, there is a differential out here in the western part of the neighborhood. In Oak Square, there's quite a lot of greenery, more street trees. In Alston, there's very few street trees. In the height of the summer, there's a temperature gradient of maybe as much as 10 degrees between a neighborhood that has got trees and a neighborhood that doesn't. So in any conversations about heat island effect, I want to flag up that Alston is severely impacted by heat island effect. The tree planting program, I'd love to see more trees planted close to our public housing. Faneuil Gardens is again close to the Mass Pike. It has open spaces around its buildings, but it doesn't have it doesn't have trees. So I think having a very intentional approach to tree planting in and around public housing developments would be really, really helpful. Those are more statements rather than questions. I just wonder, you know, there's a huge, the north of the Pike in North Alston, Brighton, is the floodplain of the Charles River. And it is anticipated that when there is an extreme weather event that drops a lot of precipitation, that neighborhood will be flooded. There is a project in the works at the moment that's been proposed by Harvard, and in partnership with Harvard and the Boston Water and Sewer, to put in like a 6-foot stormwater pipe that would go into the Charles. Some of our environmentalists in the neighborhood are concerned that, okay, that's all very well. It's a gray infrastructure, but we need to really address the upstream strategies that we can use to decrease the amount of runoff in terms of green infrastructure, bioswales, permeable pavements, bioswales, rain gardens. And I was just wondering, do you have any programs that educate and incentivize that sort of green infrastructure, even at a household level? And I'll leave that. Those are the questions I have.
Thank you. Councilor Braden, we are checking right now. We do have the Community Advisory Board for heat. And Allison, do we know if there's anyone from Alston Brighton on that board as we know it?
I'm checking on that. I'll definitely get back to you on that, Councilor.
So we will check into that. What I will say is if we find that there isn't anyone, it's not too late, and we can work with you to figure out folks from Alston Brighton who are concerned about Heat Island. We'd love for them to be engaged in the conversation as we move that project forward. I will defer to Commissioner Spector on the question of green infrastructure and stormwater.
Yes, so thank you, Councilor Braden. So first of all, a couple of years ago, the BPDA adopted the Smart Utilities policy, which did raise the amount of requirements for the amount of infiltration that large projects needed to have, from the first inch of range to an inch and a quarter. So that may not sound like a lot, but that is actually quite a substantial increase. So that starts one of the pieces to get at, you know, this, dealing with stormwater that you mentioned. Also, you know, the tree canopy plan that the chief mentioned that Parks is undertaking will address that. We don't have any specific programs that work at the, you know, the household level, but we'd certainly look forward to exploring those kinds of ideas. And we are working forward to do more in-depth analyses, working in partnership with the Boston Water and Sewer Commission to understand how increased precipitation due to climate change will affect flooding in all parts of the city. So, you know, it's definitely on our list of things to do. You know, I think you'll understand that we did give, you know, a lot of attention to sea level rise to start, and now we're working very strongly into heat, but we have not forgotten at all the problems due to precipitation, both due to flooding and, of course, to the water quality issues, which, of course, go along with that.
And Councilor Braden, just as a follow-up, we did look at the list. We do not have someone from Alston Brighton. That was an application process. So my guess is we also did not receive an application for someone because we did a lot of work to balance neighborhoods. So we'd love to work with your office to figure out, are there folks that we could be bringing on to the CAB, the Community Advisory Board, around heat from Alston Brighton, and particularly I think from you had mentioned there are a couple of neighborhoods that particularly affected, and we would love to see if we can bring in representatives from those neighborhoods.
Thank
May I
you.
make one quick point about the Smart Utilities Program and its capacity to help with green infrastructure? It is one of the identified technologies that developers have to answer questions about and do serious planning work. The point I want to raise is that the administration of this policy involves a steering committee that is an example of interdepartmental and interagency coordination that very early and upfront requires developers to deal with the energy and utility infrastructure. And so the Boston Water and Sewer Commission is actively involved in every other week meetings with an interdepartmental and interagency team on all the major projects. And so the capacity to deal institutionally with Harvard and the pipe that Councilor Breeden raised is something that can be handled in an interdepartmental and interagency way through the Smart Utilities Program and its process.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'm sure my time's up.
Yes, that was the timer going just then. So thanks so
Perfect.
much, Councilor Breeden. Next up is Councilor Mejia, and then it'll be Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Mejia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Chief White Hammond. I'm really excited to see you in this role and to your entire team. I just have a few questions. In the memo that we received this morning from your office, you mentioned a new role to help facilitate climate compliance with small businesses. Can you go further into detail about what that person would do and how are we using this person to activate small business owners of color in particular who are not usually plugged into the climate conversation? And, you know, with the same line of thinking, particularly our immigrant-owned businesses who speak multiple languages, kind of what the capacity would look like in terms of supporting them. And then Jersey City, for example, is working on a green business certification program. Are we looking at other cities to see them as a model, as different models? And then bouncing off of Councilor Breeden's question about street trees, what role has the Environment Department played in the conversation around the Mass and Cass redevelopment project, particularly around saving the street trees? I understand that you asked us to ask this question to the Transportation Department, which we will, but we'd like to know how the Environmental Department is working in collaboration with the BTD to ensure that this project maintains a green lens. And there was also some mention around heat planning initiatives with the goal of finding short-term and long-term solutions. Are there any other details you can share? More specifically, what early work are we looking at in terms of how to implement these goals? And then I have some questions for landmarks, Chair Breeden, Bach, if I can ask real quick.
Well, I think if maybe we could go to the questions you just asked of the chief and then get to those just to make sure it fits in the time.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I will try to move to the ones I think I can do quickly. So with the heat islands, so the process was already moving in terms of putting together a community advisory board. That was really good outreach to get folks on there. Then we looked at if there were any neighborhoods that were missing. That process just closed last week. So again, really thankful for the opportunity, if there are any other holes in sort of that representation, to get support from the council and folks that you think would be great. We are trying to apply for some of the COVID dollars that are coming into the city. And so we would be looking at places to address heat in the short term that have also had high COVID infection rates and have been particularly hard hit. In early assessment, and we have not finished that assessment, Mattapan looks like a neighborhood where we will need to focus some resources in terms of neighborhoods that we know there's a direct overlap in terms of heat and COVID vulnerability. But my guess is it will not end there. Because it is the summer and because it is May already, we won't be able to do everything we would have hoped for this summer. But the good thing is that there was already a process in place to look more long-term and to keep that going forward. So we'll make some interventions this summer and then immediately after begin planning for what interventions make sense for next summer and beyond. I do want to give Allison an opportunity to talk about the small business side of things, and that will take a little bit. So on the tree side, I want to see if anybody from the team has any input on that. Technically, that area is not one that's deeply under our jurisdiction, but I do think we can ask a question about if there's a way to engage. The tree planting side of things really does sit within parks, and so it might make more sense for parks to be doing some of that building and relationship building with DOT, but I don't know if there's any other staff that have other things that you want to add to that.
Well, in regard to Melania Cass, so we Counselor, we serve as a support function. You know, we're working with the transportation department to understand how they're analyzing it, thinking about the effects on water and heat, and you know, to help their analysis and you know, ensure its soundness. So that is our primary role there. I think we should turn over to Allison and let her talk about how we're going to expand our support of residents and small businesses around climate. Allison?
Sure. Thank you, Counselor. As you noted there, the mayor included a new position in the proposed budget that would help us do exactly what you're describing, which is to strengthen our outreach to small businesses and help connect them with resources, both to save energy, increase their energy efficiency, reduce their emissions, but also to connect them to resources that would help protect them from flooding or extreme heat or other events, and make sure that we can build that into economic development opportunities and connections to those pathways throughout the city. So as we move through the budget process and then straight into the hiring process, I'd love to continue to work with you and your office and the rest of council to identify what those critical needs are for someone in that role, and we can continue to build out that work plan and connect to resources in that space.
Thank you. And before I move on to the landmark question that I have, and I'm happy to hear that you have been working with the Public Health Commission. You know, I often see the correlation between heating and violence and the uptick during the summer. And I'd love to be able to make sure that we're thinking about violence prevention and the intersection of environmental justice as one conversation, because oftentimes we miss the mark, at least in our community, that we don't understand this connection. So I'm curious, Chief Hammond, and I know that you are really big on making sure that we see the bigger picture and all of this. Can you just talk a little bit more about what you're thinking around violence prevention and the intersection of environmental, the heating patterns in our neighborhoods?
Sure, and I'll do this briefly, and then I'd love to sit down and talk more. But you know, what you're naming is exactly what Chief Martinez just mentioned. And you know, I had meant to sit with him and Catalina to talk about food justice, but what we agreed is that it makes more sense for us to sit down with all of their 9 department heads, because there's so much overlap in terms of the work that they're doing. Everything from child and maternal health. If you're in a unhealthy environment, that is deeply affecting child health. So there's lots of overlap between the things that our department cares about and is working on and what HHS is doing. The other thing that was mentioned is that the VIP violence prevention work, a lot of their focus has been on activating open spaces. And so, you know, I know this is not a parks hearing, but that is a key piece of how do we use the open spaces we already have as ways of building community, rather than in some instances, sometimes they can be spaces where not the most positive of activity. How do we shift that orientation so that when our kids are using the parks, that they are safe, that people are out there enough, that they actually feel watched over in that healthy and positive way, that you know that if you act up, somebody's going to see you, and that can help to bring out the best of who you are in some moments. But I do think there's a lot of space to have those intersecting conversations, and look forward to going deeper as we have an opportunity. Yeah,
and I just realized that the landmarks is a separate commission, so
no, it's under us.
So it's part of this, but I think Councilor Mejia might need to wait for the second round, just because we're. we've run out of time. I want to get everybody in for their first round first, but
Okay.
come back with the landmarks questions because we do have Rosanne here and Carl, and they're definitely a topic for today. All right, next up is Councillor O'Malley, and then it'll be Councillor Campbell. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning, Chief. Congratulations. Great to be working with you, and I'd be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge the incredible work of Carl Spector, Allison Breezius, Brad Swing, so many others who just have been great partners to me for the last 10 years. I'm really looking forward to doing some good work as I wrap up my final year on the council. Thank you for submitting questions to answers to our questions from the working session. I just received them this morning, so I haven't really gone over them in too depth, but I want to touch upon two things before I get to building standards, which is the main thrust of my questions. The first, as it relates to CCE, it would appear that the good news is less than 1% of ratepayers opted down. The not so good news is half of 1% seem to have opted up. So being one of those 933 individuals or families, which we're very lucky, we were able to opt up. I'm just very, very curious. Was that what we expected? I mean, the bottom line is for standard, sort of the standard customer counts were at 98.5%. Is that what we expected? I know there's been tremendous outreach. I've retweeted it most times in terms of just having online and digital office hours through this time. I don't anticipate there have been a lot of takers, but nevertheless, I don't know, Allison, if you want to hop in, you're nodding your head. Is that sort of what we expected for our CCE adoption rates?
So hi, Councillor, I'd actually refer that to Brad Swing, who is supervising the CCE programs.
Great. And I noticed I'm on my phone, so I can't see anyone. So I see Jill LaRusso's joined us as well. So thank you, Joe, for your partnership. But Brad, go ahead.
Councillor, it is unfortunately what we expected. We do hope to continue to do outreach to convince people that can afford to do 100% green to opt up. It's one of the most consequential individual actions anyone can take to address the climate crisis, in our opinion, at the Municipal Energy Unit, which I oversee. We always make the message that we can never guarantee that our rates will be competitive with Eversource, but they are right now. And we also make the message that we are very concerned about energy affordability. And so at the exact same time that we urge our residents who can afford and are motivated to do 100% green to do so, we always make the same message that there is a more affordable option to
No, I appreciate that, Brad. I'm sorry to cut you off. I just want to get to a lot, but sounds good. Absolutely. My colleagues know I say every fiscal conservative ought to be an environmentalist. We have proven that we can increase our renewable standards and lower the price. And I assume we anticipate, we don't know yet, but sort of the second round, because CCE is evaluated twice a year, and the second round will be May or June, right?
Yeah.
In the next month or so. So then we'll be able to see if we can get even more competitive rates. So I'm looking forward to that. Secondly, and I don't know who this goes to, so anyone can jump in. Obviously, Mayor Walsh had decided sort of at the beginning of the pandemic to suspend our plastic bag reduction ordinance, which I supported. It then, of course, went back into effect in October. What we are seeing now, and this is an issue that I think we anticipated, and in the grand scheme of things, it is what it is. But we're seeing a lot of the thinner, those flimsy sort of 1 or 2 mm bags that many stores had purchased in bulk are still using, even though that's technically not in compliance with the law. I'm fine to have a sort of a grace period as we did when implementation first took place. But do we have, has there been communication in terms of just keeping an eye on that, complaints? I know we had used code enforcement before to make sure that there was widespread adoption. Can someone just give me like a 3-sentence line on sort of the plastic bag ordinance?
Yeah, why don't I do that? Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So yeah, so as you said, the plastic bag ordinance is now back in full effect. I have noticed the same thing you have about it getting a little lax, and the enforcement is through the Inspectional Services Department, and what I will do is I will talk with the new commissioner there now, Sean Lydon, and try to get back to you on what his thoughts about enforcement are, and how we can make sure the message is getting out that the ordinance is back in full effect.
Thank you, Carl. No, I appreciate that. And next, I want to talk a little bit about building standards. I was proud that this council led the way in terms of our municipal buildings. We've seen other things. I believe it was last year's budget hearing where the figure that we had sort of agreed upon was looking at new construction of 20,000 square feet or higher. Is that correct? Will be mandated as net zero carbon construction.
That is what is in our draft proposal for our emissions performance standard in the currently under development. And I believe it's also being looked closely at through the net zero zoning process, which is similarly underway.
No, I appreciate that, Allison. So and that's great news. So I don't want us to lose that. That's, I think, an achievable and aggressive goal, and I support it wholeheartedly. What's the timeline for adoption? Because last year it was sort of, this is what we're looking at, and we hope to have it by the new year, and now we're 5.5 months into the new year. So when will action be taken to codify that?
So
what needs to happen?
Yeah, so we most of the work that this department has to do is done. We are in the conversation with the legal department and sort of making sure that we that our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted. This was one of the things that Chris Cook raised to me as something that we need to make happen. And so I can say our office is moving aggressively. We do need to brief the mayor on this to make sure that she is aware of those standards, but I think we can move this in short order. I'm hesitant to give you an exact date, but I definitely will follow up, and we definitely know it's at the top of the list and are moving things quickly here.
Great, and that thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. So it's just getting legal to sort of sign off, and then we're good to go.
A lot of the good, strong work of saying what the office thinks we should propose based on all of what we heard from all the stakeholders has been done. And yes, we are moving towards finalized language.
And then do we have, to that end, do we have allocations in the budget for additional staff, particularly as it relates to BPDA, that would have to help serve as a resource because of just the sheer number of projects that would come down the pike?
Good question. I do know that a lot of the enforcement of this is outside of our department, not that we're not paying attention to and moving it forward. Yeah. I'm not sure, and I don't know if anybody else is sure, if other departments have, in light of the coming regulations, thought about how that would affect the staffing levels that they need in order to enforce it. I'm not clear that we have that depth of conversation.
Yeah, because the last thing I think any of us want is an unfunded mandate. And this is not an indictment on any one of us. It's an indictment on all of us. That comes to climate particularly, we do a great job of making these grand pronouncements, aggressive plans, but actually getting the will and the movement to achieve them and to hit these goals can be difficult at times. So that's something that as I begin really in earnest diving into my budget process, this is something that's really crucial to me. The gavel is up. I will say to that end, really, for my next round, will be to Beardo 2.0 and some more specific building standards questions. So thank you, Chief, and thank you, team, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor O'Malley. Next up is Councillor Campbell, then Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Campbell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations, Chief, on the new role. And of course, you have an incredible team that you work with, long-time city employees. So I want to thank them as well for their incredible work, particularly during COVID. It's not an easy time. So thank you all for the work you're doing. Some of my questions were asked. I really appreciated Councillor Flynn's question around air pollution, but also you and your team's response, including Commissioner Spector, that of course this affects a lot of neighborhoods in the city of Boston, major issue clearly being exacerbated by COVID, or revealing what we already knew and just attaching, I think, a sense of urgency to our response. So we'll stay in touch with you guys on those efforts as well. The question I have, just given the time, so just to be clear, maybe this is for you, Madam Chair, and the responses, and first of all, thank you all for the responses, very specific responses to the questions, which is a little different from some other departments, so really appreciate that specificity. Someone is laughing because she knows what department I'm referencing, and we'll see them later today. But on the how we look at the city's approach to conserving privately owned land or urban wilds that are crucial to climate resiliency, I'm assuming this should be saved for the Parks Department, Madam Chair?
I know the parcel priority plan is under the Parks Department jurisdiction. So I think
Okay.
the details.
I can
are
wait.
on that.
Okay, I saw that in the response. I wanted to be clear.
Okay, we could, Council, we can also address some of the question about urban wilds. Since most of the urban wilds belong to the Conservation Commission, but the maintenance is handled by Parks. So it's sort of a joint responsibility.
Okay. So I can save it. It was a lot of questions have been coming up on just how the sites are researched, valued, approached, what's the role the city plays, but I can wait for that budget hearing. The second, this was, I guess I'll wait. Are we waiting for landmarks as well, Councilor Bob?
Oh, landmarks, you should feel free to ask.
Oh, okay, so
People have
great.
done environment in their first round, but we have questions
so
for landmarks. So yeah.
since some of my questions were answered for environment or I got specific responses, I'll ask a landmarks question, which was just around capacity, right, to address the backlog. We got some responses there, but would love to hear a little bit more about what we can do to support the commission's work here. And then also a lot of questions on how we get the Landmarks Commission involved in the development process earlier. I feel like oftentimes, Roseanne, and you and your incredible team are brought in really late and doing the best you can, but how do we do a better job of just incorporating you and your team? And thank you for the work you're doing.
So I'll give a piece of the answer and then I'll hand it over to Roseanne to answer the wider piece, which is, Roseanne and I met last week. We talked pretty extensively about this backlog and sort of how it hamstrings the commission from being able to do all of it, which having that hanging over your head, just it's overwhelming. So we are looking at what we can do, and she's going to be putting together a plan of what we could do to clear that backlog by the end of the year, with the assumption that some of that might be a reprioritization of staff time to finish study reports, but a chunk of that is actually going to need to be bringing in some more resources to hire some additional consultants to help move through that backlog. So it has been my assumption a little bit that some of that I would see where we can spend some of that up within City Hall, but also doing some outside fundraising to sort of say to people, we're not asking you for money forever, but we are asking you for some resources to move through this particular piece. And I think also, we've seen strong support within the council, but want to mention that there's part of our budget is an additional staff person for the Landmarks Commission, which will make a big difference in terms of not preventing the backlog from continuing into the future. We did talk a little bit about Article 85 and the need to strengthen that, because sometimes the commission gets involved, can say things, but we don't always have the teeth needed to stop the demolition of items. And we really need to give the Landmarks Commission more regulatory authority to support the work, because it's not enough to be able to identify it if we don't give them the tools at their disposal to do something about it. So I can, Carl and I have been having that conversation. Roseanne and I have had that conversation. My understanding is that we are in a better position for Article 85 to be strengthened than we have been in quite a long time. And it is my hope that we could get that across the finish line this year so that Landmarks has the right tools at their disposal to do their job well. Roseanne, is there anything that you wanted to add in terms of the questions from Councilor Campbell?
Thanks, Chief. My apologies for not having my my video on. Someone turned it off and I can't figure it out. But Councilor Campbell, I appreciate your question about trying to get us involved early on in the process. And this is something that we're trying to figure out if there's a formal way to do that or using informal ways as well. I think that we've managed to get people to the point where they recognize that we exist and that we have some important work to do as part of development in Boston. We have been kind of an afterthought for a while. And I think it might be due to the sometimes mysterious ways that we work. Historic preservation is not something that everyone is really familiar with. So I am looking forward to getting us more involved and earlier in the development process as well. And hopefully we'll be able to make some improvements to the Article 85 process and get rid of that backlog. That's a big priority for us. So thank you.
Thank you, and I look forward to supporting your efforts. Oh, sorry, Carl, I didn't mean to just cut you off.
No, thank you, Cass. I just wanted to add in the past year or so, even though it's not quite hasn't become really visible yet, the historic preservation team, Rosanne and her team, have made some important steps in starting to address that backlog. We have been able to get some more resources to do the next research steps to move another 10 or so of the pending landmarks along. And really important, Rosanne and her team have taken a very hard look at the whole process and streamlined it by identifying more clearly and closely the specific research questions that need to be addressed when we do the research phase around a pending landmark. And they're also developing a standard list of guidelines that can be more quickly applied to pending landmarks when we have the basic research in place. And that all those sort of administrative but very important steps are going to facilitate our addressing that backlog as the resources become available.
Thank you all, I appreciate it. And here to continue to support, and I see the gavel, so I will pass on to my next colleague. Thank you, Councilor Bach.
Great, thank you so much, Councillor Campbell. Next up, Councillor Flaherty, and then Councillor Edwards. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. I'm going to start with Boston Landmarks Commission and just be really unequivocal. I do not see a situation where I could support this budget unless and until additional funding is brought to bear to support for additional staffing. We've got so much development going on across the city, and oftentimes residents, direct abutters, and concerned community residents are reaching out once they find out that a parcel of building in their neighborhood has been bought or is in the process of being renovated or converted, and there's landmark status to it. So we need to make sure that we're putting community residents on par with developers as it pertains to, and particularly speculators. So time has come for the Landmarks Commission to be adequately funded and staffed so that they can work with community in the first inning, as opposed to getting involved in this in the late innings when in many instances it's just too late to work and support these beautiful landmarks. So that's my opine for the moment on landmarks. Want to touch base briefly with the environment folks. Obviously the Community Preservation Act, which I chair, the committee which I chair, it's funded an acquisition open space program this past year at $1 million. Just want to make sure that we're thinking about opportunities for environment and community and conservation to work together to identify parcels that may be eligible for that program and reach out to the respective community organizations to file those. Want to also commend the work that's been done, both Councilor O'Malley and Councilor Wu, on the wetlands ordinance that the council passed. As former chair of government ops, we work very closely with Commissioner Spector and his team, and former Chief Cook, the BPDA planners. Lead sponsors, obviously, Councilor Wu and O'Malley, a variety of environmental advocacy groups. But I'm not quite sure whether or not this budget properly funds the ConCom to ensure that we can adequately enforce this ordinance. And also kudos to Amelia Crow too. She was great, very informative, and worked alongside myself and the lead sponsors to make sure that that wetlands ordinance became a reality. But again, I don't see or feel that it's properly funded in this budget. And then talking about resiliency, climate resiliency, there was some discussion, maybe a levy or some breakwater out around our harbor islands, and just want to know where that stands. Obviously, climate resiliency is at the forefront. A major issue, very much what we saw in New York or Houston in the past, would absolutely cripple our city. And it may not be a matter of if, more so when. and taking the steps now, whether it's through some type of breakwater and or levy out at our island status, will protect our city tremendously from death and devastation. So that's it for me. Climate resiliency, supporting our wetlands ordinance in the budget, and obviously supporting our Landmarks Commission, as well as partnering with community-based organizations to take advantage of our Community Preservation Act, and also to the new chief as the chair of the council's new committee on recovery funds. Look forward to working with you and your team. Would hope that we can get to the table sooner rather than later to discuss those very precious funds that will be coming our way and how and where they're going to be used, and work with our colleagues on the council to address some of the concerns in their community, so that when that process starts, it can be seamless and we can get those federal funds out to folks and to communities as quickly as possible. So, and I thank everyone's time and attention, their talents that they come bring to bear every day, and look forward to working with everyone moving forward.
Okay, I heard a series of questions in there. I'll try to see if we can address them. On the landmark side, we are really excited that this budget does introduce an additional staff person for landmarks. Not saying that that is adequate for what we may fully need, but we are excited about that additional resource. On the question of the wetlands ordinance, I will direct that to Commissioner Spector in terms of do we have the resources we need to enforce that ordinance as we understand it?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think we do. The crucial step that we're going through right now is developing the supporting regulations for that ordinance. We divided the development of regulations into 3 phases. We completed phase 1 last summer, which is the regulatory administrative regulations that instruct applicants how to, get permission and the other conditions and that they need under the ordinance. So that's all in place right now. Actually, this Wednesday, we are going to release for public comment phase 2 of the regulations, and those are going to be performance standards for new resource areas that were included in the ordinance that the council passed, but did not have performance standards at the state level. And the third part will be developing regulations and guidelines around extended areas of jurisdiction due to sea level rise, and also around the issues around environmental justice, which again were included in the ordinance. So our regulatory process is moving forward. Phase 3 has just started, so that's getting started too. And obviously, I would never turn down more resources. But we have a terrific staff, and I think once the regulatory phases are through, and we're using a lot of contract support to get that done, we do have the staff to support that work.
I see the gavel raised. So what I will just say is, Councilor Flaherty, we would love to talk to you more about CPA and that specifically, and a potential levy. I'm not sure the levy is something that we could do, but we'd be interested in engaging in the conversation around it. We'll follow up on those things as the gavel comes down.
Thank you.
Councilor Bach, if I may just very quickly say around the levy, a few years ago, we did work with UMass Boston to look at the feasibility and the practicality and the effectiveness of some sort of harbor barrier. The analysis showed then that at least at the time, it did not, and at the levels of sea level rise that we expected, that it did not make sense for us to go ahead and do that, and that the shore-based protections that we're developing under the Climate Ready Boston program do make sense. Obviously, we're happy to discuss that if new data become available, but right now that kind of harbor-wide protection across the islands or in another way does not make sense to us.
And it would not make for good relationships with Winthrop and Quincy, but we could talk about that if you'd like to go into greater depth later.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Next up's Councillor Edwards, and then I'll ask my questions. Councillor Edwards.
Hi. So again, I'll echo everyone's congrats to the new chief. Hit the ground running. So I just wanted to go right into the Landmarks Commission, specifically Article 85, which I think is the real issue. I think you can add as many people as you want to the Landmarks Commission. The process is flawed. So I am curious when or what proposals you have to change that process. Again, you can add a lot of people, but developers move faster than the process does. And the demolition delay is where the issue or the bottleneck is happening. And so by the time the landmarks can be in a position to make a decision about about demolition or delay, the building's gone. So I think that that's a concern for me. So the process is what I'd like for you guys to commit to fixing, not adding more people or adding more money. You need to move faster, and you need a process that actually is considering the analysis part. I'm not interested in having a process that is purposely trying to delay development. I'm interested in a thorough one that actually happens before a building is gone. So that's number one. Number two, speaking of like having mismatched process or concerns, and maybe this is more, I think this is actually more for the BPDA actually, in looking at development of the waterfront. So I'll leave that for, because it's mostly in the Charlestown Navy Yard. I really do appreciate the administration, the mayor, and the chief joining the fight for the substation. Really do appreciate that. The comments were, this is the beginning. So I'm curious what the next steps are that you're going to be taking to stop the substation in East Boston. So I'll just stay with that. So the process for Article 85, and what are the next steps on the substation in East Boston?
So I will direct the Article 85 question to Commissioner Spector, and then I'll jump in on the East Boston one.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor. So no argument about the limitations of Article 85. And for just that reason, we have formed an internal working group with the BPDA, with Inspectional Services, with the Department of Neighborhood Development and the Department of Neighborhood Services to determine what kind of revisions to Article 85 we can propose. We think that's going to move very quickly because there is seems to have finally developed a consensus that we need to do the sort of improvements that you suggest. I can't give you a specific timeline. It is a zoning issue, so it is under the purview of the BPDA. But again, we have a working group that has come together under the leadership of the BPDA with the membership I mentioned. And I'm very hopeful that, later this year, we will have a proposal for the public to consider, and I hope move forward.
Okay.
So two next steps I can speak of specifically in terms of the substation. We do have a meeting this week, I believe it's actually tomorrow, with the AG's office to further explore what possibilities still exist at the state level to intervene on behalf of the substation, particularly using the environmental justice language that was recently passed and that seems to have made a difference in the Springfield case.
Mm-hmm.
A little different, but again, this question of that are those similar mechanisms available to us? So that is the main conversation. I am also trying to explore, and this is I'm waiting to hear from legal and IGR, sort of what is our ability to have a conversation with DEP? Like, is there any additional information that they might need to? They are not political appointees, they're career civil servants, and so there is the possibility that they would evaluate potentially differently than administration, sort of appointed folks. And so we're trying to have an understanding if there is any lever there for us to offer additional information. The mayor does continue to push on this question of whether or not Eversource, whether or not there is still a need, but I think the challenge for us is the EFSB is the group that should have rejected that data, and they did not. So I'm not sure that question can completely change the process, though it is one people have been asking for quite a while. So those are the two steps that we are aware of in terms of the AG's office and the DEP that we are both either acting on or exploring as next steps in that conversation.
Just going back to, thank you very much. And that's exciting. I think the AG, that would, yes, we, you know, I know we're all in solidarity and very proud of Springfield and what they were able to accomplish. So if there is another way, thank you for that. With regards to the Landmarks Commission, specifically in my district, I'm curious about updates around the Nazaro Center. I know we were before the commission, we were, I think, approved for, or to continue in that process for the Nazaro Center in the North End to be landmarked. And that was 2019. It was definitely pre-pandemic. That's how I measure my life now. And so what's going on with specifically the Nazaro Center and its process to get landmarked? We're so excited about that. Community came together. We thought we came way up the upstream to get this done. And so here we are. And
so I will direct Rosanne, who has also shared with me a little bit, but she knows the details much better than I could ever. So Rosanne, do you want to share an update on that?
Sure, thanks, Chief. Councilor Edwards, we were excited about the petition being accepted for the Nazaro Center, and it has been a while. When we hear the word backlog, that means all kinds of very worthy historic resources are waiting for moving along in the process to be landmarked. And this is what we will be working on to address very quickly. Some of these pending landmarks have been pending for decades. So we need to figure out the equitable process for making sure we prioritize without leaving anything unlooked at, so to speak, unexamined. But yes, we are always every day aware of all the pending landmarks that still await designation.
Is there an order? Is there a number? How would someone be able to follow up on their application?
So this is the issue, right? We will have pending landmarks, and they're in chronological order. Obviously, we have all of them from the beginning of our time in the 70s. But then there will be the prioritization changes every year, sometimes every month, as buildings come up that are threatened with demolition. We move as quickly as we can.
If I may, because I see the gavel, make a suggestion. I see the gavel, so I didn't mean to cut you off, but just for our policy, this is a city building. And so the likelihood of it being developed or demolished is very little. So I'm not saying we should prioritize our own buildings and community centers, but we should, if there's a possibility to move them along in landmarks, because I think that would just shrink the haystack and actually get, because it's already a public amenity. So I would hope that the city of Boston be inclined to at least analyze whether we do or don't want to protect this. If we don't, okay, fine, let it go be developed. If we do, then let's landmark it and move along in the process. So I see the gavel. I see you, Councilor Bach.
Try to move these pending applications by the end of the year. We're working on a plan for how we get through the backlog. We may not finish every single one by the end of the year, but we are trying to make a significant dent over the next 8 months.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Yes, and I'll move into my questions now and set a timer on myself because I know I have many. Yeah, I think to that point, while I agree with Councilor Edwards tremendously that we need to fix Article 85, that's a fundamental process issue. And frankly, if you all don't introduce something this year, I will, but I would be happy to be beaten to it by a interagency working group. But I also think that there are aspects of our current situation that can be addressed by more resources, and the backlog is right up at the top of that list. And I will say, like, I'm very encouraged, when we were in this hearing a year ago, we did the math and finishing the landmarks backlog at the pace at which we had been moving was going to take us 99 years. So just the work in the last year has sped up that rate. And obviously, if we can really push for a plan to get to clear it out by the end of the year, I think that would be transformational. And I think, to your point, Chief, it would really it would just free up resources and attention for other more proactive things. Because what's become very clear in our equity-oriented conversations is that, like, if you don't have a lot of resources to proactively, commission study reports and get your thing protected, then it's always going to be too little, too late to save, a lot of our really beloved and historical resources in a bunch of our communities, especially our immigrant communities, our communities of color. So, I think we've got to shift the dynamic there, and getting rid of the backlog is an important piece. Obviously, getting some of these new districts up and running is an important piece. And so I'm really excited about the additional hire, and just definitely want to celebrate that. And also celebrate the staff increases, which, grade changes is not sexy, but it's a huge part of retaining talent. And for a long time, what talent we've been able to hold in the historic preservation world in the city has typically gone to the BPDA because of their more competitive salary structure. And so it's great to keep some of it actually, over on the landmark side of the house. I do think that while it's great to have that additional person can't be the solution to the backlog and to the other things, because we're creating new capacity for that person to serve. And I feel like our existing folks, with their commissions are already overtaxed. And so definitely agree with Councilor Flaherty, there's still room for more staff capacity here. And would like us to talk about that. I'd also, on the proactive side, and this is a question I had in my thing, but maybe if you guys could address it a little bit. I mean, it feels to me like it is time to be talking about a citywide historical survey. This came up a bit last year. It's come up as a thing. Could we do it with administrative funds in the Community Preservation Act side? Could it be a big Community Preservation Act thing, like some of the home ownership money and the parcel acquisition, like stuff on the environment and housing side, like a kind of big initiative. But that seems like a really important piece of the equity thing, is to proactively be looking at what's valuable in our neighborhoods and not waiting for the moment that a building is threatened or there's a bunch of folks who are lucky to be deep-pocketed who support it. So I would love to hear a little bit. I don't know, Chief Hammond, if that has risen to the surface in your first couple of weeks, but if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so I mean, I have had Rosanne and I sat down, and I do think a citywide survey would be amazing. I think where there are a couple of questions are, one, doing the survey if we haven't cleared the backlog feels like putting the cart before the horse. And then I do think that we may need to have a conversation about additional resources to really be able to sustain that. And I think the other piece, so I think that is a priority, very much so. And the question is, if we haven't worked out the backlog in Article 85, do we jump and do something even bigger? So we had a conversation about, like, what could we do in this next year that shows people what could be possible were we to do a larger survey. Where are there places of significance, particularly to our Indigenous population or communities of color that haven't been highlighted, that we could do some focus on in the next year, while not taking on something that huge when we still haven't gotten all the resources and support to stay where we are. And so I think that the staff is great and works hard. I would want to make sure that if we are asking for that level of work, that they have the resources and support and don't feel still underwater to launch that. So I don't think it at all is a no. I think that but I do think that there are people who have raised resource questions, and I'm not sure we are yet at the level of resources that would make that fully feasible, and then to identify them and not be able to move them through the process because of a backlog feels, again, not the greatest. So I think what we'd love to do, I mean, I'm glad that there's a lot of excitement. Why don't we spend some time? We got a little bit of time to talk about work planning, and it might make sense for us to really move into that work planning process, get clear about what we're going to do, including the bringing on of a new staff person, and come back to the the council sort of to figure out what the right timeline is for that. But I do think there's an appetite. It's just a question of sequencing and resources.
Yeah, no, it's good to, and I think that's real. I think we've got to get out from being underwater in order to make that leap forward. I just think that that it all needs to be part of a plan where that's where we're going, right? The same way that on the environment side, we've got a bunch of strategies that are, that we did in that 2019 action plan to sort of tell us, okay, these are the things we need to be doing in order to get to these ultimate goals, right? Around our carbon goals. But we have to, the trick is, does it all add up to actually hitting those goals, right? And for me, similarly, it's like a historic preservation plan where we, like a plan for the department where we do get back from being underwater is great, but it's got to be sort of with the momentum of trying to get to that new standard. And I think a huge piece of that is the Article 85 fix, because as long as, the perception is, well, let's, I just think like there's a perception that resources are starved on the historic preservation side because historic preservation gets in the way of development, right? And that there's a kind of like moneyed interest dynamic at the table. I think that if we moved historic preservation much earlier in the process, we would find more opportunities for adaptive reuse. I think that we could do a lot, and it's a conversation for another day, to recognize the way in which our historic resources drive tourism, drive local economies, make our neighborhoods great places to be, right? There's just like a lot we could do to change the conversation. Would love us to be working together with a kind of plan that's thinking at that scale and that is looking to put further resources in this year to clear the backlog and make that shift and commit to a sort of systems level plan. And I'll just say, I think also on archaeology, it was referenced in the document, so I won't dig into it, but like the grants we get are great. The archaeologist is awesome. The book that just came out is great. We do so much cataloging of stuff without the opportunity to do the real public history and engagement that we should be able to do because of our staffing limitations.
Yep.
It's just like that also feels like somewhere we need to go bigger.
Yeah, and I think we welcome the conversation. I think again, it's just a question of sequencing, but I do think Rosanne and I had a conversation about what down payment could we put on that this year. And I don't want to speak out of turn because we haven't even talked to the staff fully yet to sort of see what people believe and possibly are there opportunities to bring together landmarks and environment and open space? Like, are there places for synergy across the cabinet that bring some resources to bear and no one group is holding that on their own? But are there places to, because some of our historic landmarks are also climate vulnerable and also dealing with issues of gentrification and other things. So I think more to come. I don't want to jump the gun, but we have had that conversation and appreciate the council's focus on the making sure that the resources are there to do the work well. I think the big lift will be the backlog. And so I do want to make sure that we keep some focus there just so that we can move it through. But yes, a more expansive vision and bringing a more expansive vision that has the possibility also to bring in more resources is clearly in the conversation and on the table.
And we should in Boston, our ambition should be to be the best historic city in the country on this stuff. And I think we're pretty early to the Landmarks Commission game, and then others have kind of gotten ahead of us in terms of tools and strategies and resources. So we need to catch up a bit. That is my time on my first round, so I'll save a couple of environment questions. We will go through a quick second round now for counselors. Counselors who I still see here, it'll be Braden, Mejia, O'Malley, Edwards. And then I do have some long awaiting members of the public who are going to testify. So I promise you that we will get to you after that second round, regardless of whether counselors have any further questions. So Counselor Braden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Hammond, I am in the working on getting a couple of representatives for the Community Advisory Board on Heat Island Effect and also who have lived experience in Alston Brighton. So watch that space. I just want to echo so much of what our colleagues are saying about the importance of landmarks. I put my name on that list of people who are strongly advocating for a robust Landmarks Commission and a serious reworking of the Article 85, extension of the notification period or the demolition delay process. We are losing so much of our valuable historic infrastructure in this mad rush to develop everything in Boston. And very often the voices of the little people get left behind. Really, I think we've covered, my colleagues have asked many of the questions I was going to ask. I'm trying to, we will have another hearing on parks, Madam Chair. Yeah, my questions.
Yes, we'll have a dedicated hearing on parks, and that will also be the right place for urban forestry.
Okay, I'm going to hold my questions to that. So thank you so much. I don't have any other questions on this at the moment. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Councillor Braden. Councillor Mejia?
Yes, so in regards to landmarks, I'm just curious what is the breakdown for landmarks per neighborhood, and how does the Landmarks Commission advocate on behalf of spaces that have extreme cultural significance in our communities, particularly to Councillor Bach's point, if the community doesn't have deep pockets? I'm thinking specifically about the Roxbury Love mural in particular, as an example of that.
I will let Rosanne answer that question, but I do want to note that that is part of the reason that we're talking about this need for a citywide survey, because, for instance, so just as folks should, it's worth noting, May is National Historic Preservation Month, and I've got an opportunity to go to a couple of the webinars hosted by the Landmarks Commission. I did not know how many of our historic homes, for instance, were in Dorchester. But now I'm a little interested, and now I'm kind of like, what do I need to go do and look at it? So we are long overdue for an opportunity to really update that information in a more complete way. I think, as I was saying, we're trying to find the balance between moving through the backlog, onboarding new staff. There is a new historic district process that's been moving forward in Roxbury. And so Rosanne can also talk about this. Not all of the districts starting out were under our control exactly. So the state also plays a role in how it's been set up. But Rosanne, did you want to add more context?
Sure, Councillor Maya, the Highland Park District is actually part of the backlog. It's been pending for quite a while. So the fact that we have now been able to start the next steps in the process by appointing a steering committee and being able to hire part-time staff to support the creation of a historic district in Highland Park will help reduce the number of pending districts through the enthusiasm and support of neighborhood residents there. So part of the designation process is obviously the mayor approves or does not approve, and then city council confirms that process. So that will be coming down the pike.
Thank you for that. I'm also curious, we participate in a lot of civic association meetings. I can just remember some of our meetings with Meeting House Hill, I believe it is. And there was some discussions about a piece of land that many of the residents believe should have been deemed a landmark as a way to preserve it and to also stop development. So just wanted to just put you all on notice that I will be paying attention to a lot of those issues, specifically in neighborhoods like Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, that oftentimes go unseen and underutilized, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, and I think what you're raising is something that we're very clear about, that there are racial and class inequities in how landmarks are designated, who even has the information to know how to move through the process. I think that is definitely a concern. I think we had a really great conversation about the general focus on equity in our office and the putting equity at the center of what all of us are doing. I think making sure that if we get people excited to apply, that their applications don't wait so long is an important pre-step, because we don't want to drum up excitement and then have people be like, so when do we hear back? And we're like, in 2040, right? We want to make sure that we have a good internal process to move through the backlog and really think about how do we make sure that it doesn't creep up again? Because if you get everyone excited and then you can't process the applications, that will sort of dim that excitement. So I think what you're raising and the questions of equity and which neighborhoods and which people know, they are very real. And I think the goal is to make sure that Landmarks has what it needs to be able to be more proactive, to be able to get out there more. And that means, having some more resources and a process to move through that backlog so we can bring more folks in.
And before the gavel goes, I just wanted to offer that as we start thinking about this process, I think that the community will benefit from a sort of like a PSA campaign to educate people about what is Landmarks, how it works, just because even the whole conversation, I see it oftentimes as a very privileged one, and not everyone is working with the same terminology or the same understanding. And I think that as we continue to roll this out, censoring it in a way that folks can feel engaged by having information that's accessible to them to understand would be part of that planning process. And then I also think getting outside of Zoom and City Hall and going directly into some of these communities and not just having the usual suspects that show up, like civic association and formal groups are really great. But then there are a lot of abutters in the neighborhood who aren't participating in these civic association groups that we should find ways to engage them. And before Councilor Bach gives me the gavel or puts me on mute, I guess that's all for me. And thank you so very much for all your hard work and looking forward to partnering with you all in this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Next up is Councilor O'Malley and then Councilor Edwards. President O'Malley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to you and Councilor Mejia and Councilor Flaherty and others bringing up the historic preservation landmarks. It's obviously a passion of mine as well, but I want to bring it back a little bit to some more environment questions while I have you before we get to public testimony. So Chief, I had asked about sort of Beardo 2.0 and in your response, you talked about, well, there were obviously some significant obstacles, I'm paraphrasing, to collecting Beardo data. You were able to obtain reports for over 80% of the covered space. And this year, you're ahead of last year's pace, hope to be around the 90% mark again. So bravo, well done with everything, challenges of the pandemic. And then the last sentence is, and this is what I want to unpack a little bit. For this reason, Climate Action Plan calls for the development of a building performance standard. So I guess my question is, where are we in sort of Beardo 2.0? I know I had talked about this with Chief Cook and you and I briefly spoke about it on the phone, but we knew when, we passed Beardo with Mayor Menino back in 2013, I believe it was, Carl, right before Mayor Menino left office, we knew and it was an ambitious goal. And now that the importance of our existing building stocks and getting to a blueprint on retrofits and other things has never been more pertinent because we're getting closer and closer to 2030. So I guess, can you talk a little bit about sort of without just general specifics, more general, less generally, more specifics on sort of how you see Beardo, Chief White-Hammond, and how we can be helpful to getting this done?
So I'm going to direct that mostly to Allison, but I do want to just say that part of the building performance standards is part of how we see building off of that, but taking it wider and deeper. So I do think, Allison, if you want to weigh in on this.
Sure. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Councilor. So, Councilor, happy to provide you a lot of this information offline and go into much detail. We've spent the last year, I think, as you know, going through a very very complete, we think, community process. We've held a technical advisory group, a resident advisory group, numerous stakeholder meetings, outreach, broad community outreach engagement opportunities. All of those materials are available online, including those technical reports. We've proposed a draft policy, and I think the best summary out there is our last open house materials that goes through each of the elements, what we've learned through Birdo, the first round, what's working and we absolutely want to keep in terms of reporting and disclosure and some of those critical metrics, and then where we need to adapt and enhance. So moving very specifically to emissions targets for large buildings, lowering the threshold, other things as we've described. So if you have specific questions on any of those elements, very happy to go into them.
I guess I'll contradict my own question and ask for the sort of generally, well done. I think that's successful and the positive and important. I guess, what is the process? Any Birdo itself was an ordinance that was submitted to actually the Government Operations Committee, which I chaired during that time. So when will the administration be sending the City Council this ordinance? I may have frozen for a second there. Sorry, I'm on.
You did.
Yeah.
You were asking when they would send the ordinance.
I did. Sorry. Yes.
Chief?
So what I can say is that we had a meeting last week. We are preparing to brief the mayor. It's now on a request that I made last week to get half an hour with the mayor to brief her on this. But we also, there are some, I think it is also in legal. So there's both, we do want to make sure that the mayor is aware of where it has landed, and it is also illegal to make sure that we are in compliance when we, and our legal language is tight when we introduce. It was one of the things that Chris Cook very clearly said to me, we need to get done. And I have tried to get my sea legs just a bit so I make sure that I actually understand what it is. And so then we can take it to the mayor and get that. But we do know we need to move it in short order. I do not have a timeline exactly because I am trying to understand when we are going to get it back from legal. But we will make sure that the mayor is clear and briefed on it. So that once we get what we need from legal, we can move relatively quickly and engage the council in this conversation.
Fair enough. And again, as someone who didn't write the first Birdo legislation, but did help shepherd it through, and I know several colleagues can sort of explain how that went, happy to advance this any way I can. And again, to be completely candid, not being on a ballot this fall means I just want to get this done. It's less about sort of political credit or getting things done. So I guess I've said to you, Chief, I've said to the acting mayor, I'm happy to work and partner with you guys on this. I want to see something done. And I'm happy to, if it's makes more sense to originate this from the council's point of view. I know my colleagues and I all, to a person, have all been very, very interested in this work. So I'm happy to advance it that way. If that's what if that seems to get us there sooner. But again, look forward to a good partnership to Birdo 2.0. Very briefly, just want to go into some line items. It seems like it's a pretty standard increase just on sort of for the budget book. Can I just ask specifically, the Boston Pollution Abatement Fund from external seems to have gone down pretty dramatically. Can I get some clarity on that? Anyone?
Who wants to step in on, Carl, did you want to?
Yeah, Council, let us get back to you on that. Actually,
Okay.
when I look at that number, it doesn't quite make sense to me either, but we'll get back to you about it.
Okay, fair enough. And then the Moon Island project of 200,000, is that for the photovoltaic panels along Moon Island?
Joe?
Yes, Councillor, that $200,000 is the city's cost share for that grant to install the solar, excuse me, and battery storage at Moon Island.
No, and you were great. You walked us through that at our hearing, so delighted for that. And then On line item 52900, contracted services is up $900,000. Can we get a little more clarity on that?
Yeah, that's the green jobs training money.
Gotcha. Okay, so nearly $1 million. And then, yeah, otherwise things seem pretty, I think there's a little increase. Oh, 51, line item 51000 is up about 323,000. How many new employees would that represent?
2.
Probably 2. Great. Okay. That is all for this round, Madam Chair. Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor O'Malley. All right, Councillor Edwards.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. I'll wait till I'm out of an elevator to get on camera. But so real quick, last year I'd followed up on school infrastructure and some of the building that we had done. And I just want to follow up on some of those questions last year. Specifically, what are the environmental steps you're taking with regards to our buildings? And are the way we are, I don't know, recovering in our schools specifically. I think I'd asked about all sorts of, we were doing retrogrades, white roofs, all of those things. We're looking at city properties, schools, our food waste, how, they can be ecosystems unto themselves. So what are we doing as a city in terms of enforcing environmental policy within our schools and infrastructure of our schools? The other question I had was with regards to, and I think it was just following up again on Landsmark, not to beat a dead horse, but I wanted to make sure that we had an understanding, specifically, I think it was 38 Everett Street. There was concerns in East Boston as to how that process went down. And there was a lot of there's a lot of distrust specifically in the neighborhood because of the way that process went down. The building was going down before there was, again, a decision from Landmarks. And then finally, so tell me a little bit about your community engagement process for local environmental and green organizations as to your resiliency infrastructure work. So on the Mary Ellen Welch Greenway, it did an extensive planning and outreach process to create a garden space, but found out at the last minute that flood and resilience infrastructure will significantly prohibit the design plan. So how can we ensure that we don't get people excited, built up, ready to go for something that we ultimately can't do because we didn't either study it enough? And then I did have a question from a constituent text me just now about community gardens and how we can pre-map a neighborhood for potential spaces for community gardens. I know the Bremen Street one and I think it's Sumner Street or Ingle Hill has like 100 or 200 person waiting list. And Bremen Street may be like 2 years long to get into the community garden. So is there a process, or could we start a process that allows for community to kind of map out where they can go, raised beds could go here, so on and so forth, to allow for more community garden? I think it's a wonderful unifying place. We have Eastie Farms, that very well, Chief. They work, right? So how can we get more of them? And that's it for me. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to try to move these through. So on the schools issue, I am setting up a meeting with Superintendent Casilius to talk overall. I do know there are resources that are coming into them right now at this point with COVID recovery and trying to figure out if there are ways that we can be helpful as they identify those. And there is an Office of Sustainability there, so also wanting to meet with them and sort of figuring out where they are as in the big picture plan within BPS. But I will hand it over to Brad to speak quickly about Renew Boston Trust and how that works, because that's a lot of, you started off with some of the questions about retrofits. So Brad, do you want to go there quickly?
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Councilor. Yes, the city's Renew Boston Trust program, the self-funded energy and water retrofit work is now working with 10 public schools in the next phase of the work, and that's planning work right now. And energy retrofits have an opportunity to address ventilation in a direct way, so that will be an important part of the focus of that work. I wanted to mention that the push for white roofs is one that we're very interested in. I would suggest that there's a lot of competition for rooftop work that can be environmentally significant. And on that regard, we're looking at a significant photovoltaic installation on Boston Public School roofs as part of the next phase of Renew Boston Trust. So I'm happy to get back to you.
That's exciting. Just want to say that that's extremely exciting. So
yes, we're very excited about the opportunity to really dig into the schools. We're working on 10 schools in the third phase of the Renew Boston Trust.
All right, so I will try to get on to the community gardens question. I did have a meeting again today with HHS and with Catalina from the Office of Food Access. We have a meeting, I think later this week with D&D, wanting to talk about how we increase that. Backlog is very real. The trustees is awaiting a call from us to talk about, is there a possibility of prioritizing access to what garden infrastructure is there for low-income folks. So excited that everybody wants to grow. And the question is there any way to make sure that we put to the front of the line folks who need the growing space for direct food? So there is a robust conversation, somewhat at the food access conversation, it is pretty pronounced. The growing side of it, we are hoping to bring some support to bear to that side of the conversation. As you know, I actually manage a community garden, Virginia Monadnock. I got a waiting list, trying to figure out how to get everybody in. It's a challenge, and I think the reality is we just need to grow the amount of space that's available. But we are early in that conversation, and that's something that you want to jump into. We would love to have you there. In terms of the community garden from the school and the restrictions in advance, good question. I think that's something for us to think through. I mean, I think part of it is just having folks know, particularly in our most vulnerable neighborhoods, maybe engaging them in the conversation a little bit earlier about where things are and making sure they have the access to some of the reports, because many of these things actually are documented in some place. It's just maybe the folks that don't always have access to it. So we love to go offline and really think about that. And then finally, the question around Everett Street, and I can't tell, I think we are low on time, but Roseanne, did you want to, that was a landmarks question, correct, around Everett Street in that process?
Yes, Chief, it is. So the house at 38 Lexington Street is was a pending landmark, and also went through the Article 85 process. The house was demolished, to our surprise, the day after the demolition 90-day period expired. And it just points up the problem with having pending landmarks not protected. And
right.
Yeah, problematic.
So we will again commit to moving those through much more aggressively this year, figuring out what resources we need, even if they are outside resources, to help move the backlog that we currently have. And then again, we are really excited about this idea of a citywide process of naming and cataloging what landmarks are there. We will start that when we have some confidence that once we identify them, we can make sure that we can actually move. And then we've already talked about the Article 85 work. So look forward to partnering on that moving forward.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Councilor Edwards. And I'm glad you asked that. Yeah, I would love to know if there's anything we can do in the meantime to think about whether we might have the authority to assert that you can't demolish a pending landmark, or at least sort of throw up some hurdles to doing that beyond what exists. It's so disappointing for the community to have a building practically designated like that and then not get it. So I don't know, Chief, if you guys are talking to ISD about that, but I think it's like in the zoning commission, if something if there's a sort of period where zoning hasn't gone into effect yet, but as soon as it's been noticed, it's sort of understood that it's kind of coming and you can't do something in countervention of it. I wonder if we could circle with ISD and legal and think about something on that front for pending.
Yeah, so we are having conversations with the ISD commissioner, whether he has any authority that could be useful there, because for just the reasons that you mentioned.
Okay, great, Commissioner. That's great to hear. I just wanted to say on the green jobs front, I mean, definitely would like to work with you all. We had these 2 hearings on a conservation corps, one in December, one in March. And, you know, I think you referenced, Chief, some of the educational institutions we could get involved. One of the things that we sort of surfaced in those conversations, which were kind of respectively about urban forestry and then green infrastructure in terms of their focus, was just a lot of local partners that we have on the ground who are doing sort of small programs, especially with our youth, and talking a lot about the need for kind of a connective tissue and support for them. And I think hopefully he'll still be on. I know David Cleely was up for a public testimony at this hearing, but Codman Square NDC does amazing work there. Southwest CDC, Emerald Necklace, Speak for the Trees. We've just got a bunch of programs that are kind of in microcosm working on that. How do you introduce youth to green jobs? And so 2 thoughts from me on this would just be, when we think about like quick, immediate action steps, thinking about what can we do in partnership with those Success Link partners this summer, even if it's like having a point person whose job is to like visit all those programs and kind of get to know them and think about how they would potentially look like part of a scale up, or like support them a bit more, create that connective tissue. I just think that's a very immediate, like July, August intervention that we could do. And then one of the things, when we had Philadelphia's Power Corps up to talk to us in March, they were great, very willing to be sort of partners in the nuts and bolts stuff. And definitely what came up with them was that, you know, as you convene this community advisory, there's also, with something like this, to really shift, right, where we would actually be able to do a bunch of capital planning. We'd be creating like roads to, you know, new jobs in some of our departments. We'd be creating, you know, a job pool to support some of the work like the carbon building standards that you guys are working on, right? The private market that's going to drive. Philadelphia found with setting up Power Corps that it just desperately needed somebody to deal with the intra-departmental like mechanics of trying to make sure, you know, that the procurement piece and the contracts piece and the different workforce development plus environment, et cetera, was all kind of playing the same tune. And it just, that also seems like an early step, right, is to like put somebody into that coordination role in addition to kind of the outside stakeholders. So those are a couple of things. And then I would just say, yeah, we would hope. I'm excited about this money because I think it has the opportunity to build on what we've been talking about for the last year. Was really pleased to be working with Chris Cook on that. And I think that that also surfaced some pretty interesting partners, like the U.S. Forestry Service. Boston's one of its only urban centers in the country. And then we're sitting in this situation where UMass has one of the best programs in the country, but like we're still, none of our young people are ending up in those routes, right? So I just really want to surface that we would hate in the transition to lose track of some of the work that we've been doing there. But that I think there is some like immediate stuff we could do as we try to plan for a bigger thing in the future.
Yeah. And I think if we had more time, you know, one of the things I had a good conversation with Commissioner Woods about how hard it is to find arborists, young arborists. You know, so there are a number of places of opportunity. We want to both move quickly and be thoughtful. So really thankful for some of the suggestions about places where there are some opportunities to move in short order.
Great. Yeah. And then I'll just say carbon performance standards, like we just need to get them in ASAP. Totally agree with Councilor O'Malley. Like it's just like the time is now. So anything we can do to not have that sit with legal for a year. But I also think that has to be a conversation with this, because what we found as we dug in was, okay, the city can figure out, like, we can do the urban forestry thing. We can create a real pipeline of arborists, and hopefully, you know, Boston becomes the place that everyone around the country hires their amazing young urban, you know, black and brown arborists from, right? Like we could, I think that's a thing we can do. Same thing, green infrastructure. Philly is ahead of us, but like we can, you know, we have a real route. And like I said, David Quealy's been doing great stuff. Lots of people are doing great stuff. Again, those also, we can create a route into some public jobs with water and sewer and stuff. What's weird about the building retrofit stuff is that, not weird, but just different, right? Is it's a private workforce world. And so the route for using a conservation corps to get there is not as obvious, but it's also clear that we're going to drive, like, this is going to be like one of the biggest markets that we are driving through our regulatory action. And if we don't proactively figure out how to meet that need that we are creating with our young people, it will be met by sort of like, you know, just whatever rushes into the brain, which is unlikely to be our young people. So just really want to flag that as an urgent thing. And then, yeah, I think, I'm sure I've used my own time. So I have an infinite set of questions and comments for environment and landmarks, but I just really am so grateful for the work that you all do. And I'm really grateful to you, Chief, for jumping in with us, as you say, quite early in your tenure here. And I am going to go down to public testimony, except that Councillor Braden has her hand up, and since she cut off her time so early, I will let her give a quick thing, Councillor Braden, but then I want to get to the public.
Thank you. Just a quick heads up with regard to, you know, doing a historical survey. I know in Alston Brighton we have a very active historical society that has done such a survey of historical sites, and they do a walking tour of the district with a binder that includes photographs and references to all the historic sites that have been lost over the years. It's a sad reflection of what we're losing. But I think just to think about the historical societies in the different neighborhoods as a resource to help in doing some of the footwork in doing a historical survey across the city. There's a lot of information that's already there that I'm sure they'd be willing and enthusiastic partners on that project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Yeah, and her mention of infrastructure and binders just reminded me that I think the idea of having a binder is a great one, Chief White-Hammond. I think we all should be preparing. We all know that that infrastructure bill, if it comes through, there's going to be this huge interest on the federal side to have it be spent quickly. And so those of us who are ready with projects will benefit. And I just think some of the huge scale stuff we need. I mean, I think in my district about the project to daylight the end of the Muddy River, which is our most polluted tributary of the Charles, actually connect up the Esplanade and the Fens, you know, create a real connection there. There's a bunch of great ecosystem stuff we can do. That is a project that like needs federal money, and we have to be ready to ask for it. I mean, you know, we're trying to be ready in terms of bothering our Congress people to put in earmark requests, but you know, it may or may not go that route depending on what the Senate does. So I just think being ready with projects is a great idea. And yeah, so now I want to go to public testimony. So I'm going to take the first three I've got, which are Greg Gaylor of the Boston Preservation Alliance, David Quealy from Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation, and Michael Thomas. I will just say that if you are signed up to testify and you are not currently in the Zoom, now would be the time to get in the Zoom. And if you have trouble figuring out how to do that, shoot ccc.wm@boston.gov a note and staff will help make that happen. So before, I'm just about to go to Greg. Before that, I just one more time want to thank Chief Hammond and Commissioner Spector and Rosanne Foley and Allison Brizius. And now I'm listing everybody, which is dangerous. Also Brad Swing and Joe LaRusso for joining us. It's a great team, and a special shout out to the Landmarks folks who so frequently field questions and queries from me. All right, going now to Greg Gaylor from the Boston Preservation Alliance. Greg, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm Greg Gaylor, the Executive Director of the Boston Preservation Alliance. I want to thank Chief White-Hammond for touching on many of our concerns, and we're excited to work with her. And I also thank councilors for their support and recognition that historic resources are a critical asset of the city. But I'll be a little more blunt than others this morning. How we treat our cultural heritage in Boston is in crisis. We're failing to balance growth and change with how we protect the places that represent our collective past. The Under-Resourced Landmarks Commission struggles each day to fulfill its regulatory responsibilities to review demolitions, to attend to demands for new landmarks, and to provide prompt service to properly guide growth balanced with preservation. The guardrails in our system are failing. The BLC struggles to reply to residents begging for help as they see their neighborhoods whittled away. The BLC is unable to be proactive, unable to be equitable, unable to properly guide our city with efficient, fair, and up-to-date regulations and procedures, unable to focus on fixing the process, as was mentioned earlier. Without investment in the Landmarks Commission, the City of Boston simply cannot meet our goals for equity and inclusion, cannot meet our environmental goals, without proactively addressing over 70% of the city built before World War II. They can't respond to residents demanding the distinctiveness of their neighborhoods not be erased, or effectively guide property owners and developers. Now, while I thank the mayor for offering modest increases to the Landmarks Commission budget, including funding for an additional staff member, these increases do not halt the backward momentum we're facing. And I have some proposed solutions. I urge the city to provide financial support for 3 items. Number 1, a permanent additional BLC staff person as a community liaison to focus directly in the neighborhoods, helping to address the serious equity imbalance we have. For example, Mattapan has only 1 landmark. Hyde Park has none. New staff can provide guidance and collaboration with residents in communities, shift to a more proactive approach, rather than the too late reactive mode that causes the consternation you all hear from your constituents. We need this as a minimum for another staff increase. Number 2, funding to tackle the long-standing backlog you've heard about and talked about. That's nearly 90 pending landmark petitions. This ambiguity leaves buildings vulnerable. It pollutes the whole landmarking process with uncertainty. Additionally, it's completely inequitable, with groups able to privately raise funds to complete needed studies ahead of others. This backlog, you've sort of heard, is like a chain around BLC's neck, leaving them unable to complete the process of newly accepted landmark petitions in a timely manner. The delay caused by insufficient staffing in the backlog is why we recently lost buildings in Roxbury and the one already talked about in East Boston. We estimate that $200,000 could just tackle this problem, either by outside contract or with a temporary 3-year staff position. I think it's unrealistic to think that with existing staff and moving people around, you're going to get this accomplished. This should not require outside fundraising. This is a central function of the city, and it should be in the budget. Finally, number 3, which was also referenced, a multi-year comprehensive survey of historic resources throughout the city. This is a long overdue investment that will benefit all constituents. It will reduce uncertainty, allow for planning and forward thinking, and provide a tool for the city to better control the fate of its existing buildings. It'll provide an understanding of the historic resources we have, their value to residents, and how we can best evolve and grow without destroying the heritage important to all. It'll discover stories and places of importance to our BIPOC and immigrant communities who are woefully underrepresented in both our historical narrative and in the places we protect for future generations. A survey also helps guide development by providing information about the significance of properties, reducing the surprises encountered today, which leads to frustration all around. A survey will allow the city to better direct desired growth to where it will be more universally welcomed, better balancing the growth and preservation we all desire. This is a serious commitment that we need, and we estimate this is a $3 million multi-year initiative. Note that the 2 latter items pair well with the one-time 3-year window we hope to see in the federal stimulus funds. I urge you to remember that historic resources that we enjoy and learn from today, and the new ones that we uncover as we broaden our stories, don't survive by accident. They require investment, serious investment that's an important part of the city budget. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg, and thank you for those 3 really concrete suggestions. I think they're all excellent. So, and to the Alliance for all the work that you do. Next up, we have David Quealy and then Michael Thomas. David.
Hi, thank you. My camera's not working, so you'll just have to hear my disembodied voice. Thank you for counselors and staff and guests, and welcome to Chief White Hammond. I'm Dave Quealy, Director of Eco Innovation at Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation. And I'm here representing Codman Square in DC, as well as the Fairmont Indigo CDC Collaborative, or FICC, a collaborative that includes Codman Square in DC, Southwest Boston CDC, and Dorchester Bay EDC. Along with my colleagues, Pat Alvarez of Southwest Boston, Dorchester resident Michael Thomas, and Jim Recht of Climate Code Blue, I'm here to support the creation of the Boston Conservation Corps, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create green jobs that serve all Boston residents while promoting equity and pathways to careers that should provide a ladder of success, particularly for BIPOC residents and workers that have been left out of Boston's ongoing expansion and development. Creation of the Conservation Corps is one of 3 key areas of focus for FICC as part of our Kresge Climate Justice, Climate Change, Health, and Equity Initiative. The other related areas of focus for us include equitably resourcing inner city communities through the recently passed Massachusetts Climate Roadmap Bill and by supporting HERO legislation currently before the legislature. These programs generate $12 million and $300 million respectively for workforce development, affordable housing, and open space. Codman Square NDC's successful green infrastructure training and certification program can provide training to qualified members of the Conservation Corps, creating a cadre of residents with the skills and knowledge needed to help build, maintain, and inspect Boston's climate mitigating green infrastructure. The city should emulate and implement proven minority hiring requirements, such as those within model programs like Power Corps in Philadelphia and DC Water in Washington, DC. We support the initial proposed funding allotment of $4 million for 2022 and suggest that the city budget be expanded in ensuing years to ensure program expansion and growth across key Boston departments such as Boston Water and Sewer, Public Works, Parks, and BTD, and engagement of the mayor's offices of workforce development, reentry citizens, and immigrant advancement to ensure training, certification, and hiring policy and practices benefit participants of these departments' programs. Sources of ongoing funding for training and projects in future could include a portion of any stormwater fees collected by Boston Water and Sewer in future. Likewise, in related RFPs or RFQs, giving more points to contractors who agree to hire MBEs and WBEs and city residents with green infrastructure related certifications will help meet those minority goals. And language that gives MBEs or WBEs or other contractors additional points in city department rankings should also be considered. The city should also work to activate green funding that local unions have to train residents and union members in green techniques related to their respective unions. Further, the city should work with unions to ensure that 50% of all union-related green funding infrastructure projects be reserved for BIPOC union members that are certified, with said graduates being reached through proactive union outreach. I want to thank you for the time you've given me to give this testimony and further refer you to related written testimony submitted by Gail Lattimore, Executive Director of Codman Square NDC. And I know Jim Recht was waiting for a while, but he ended up submitting his testimony in writing. So with that, I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. Yes, and the written testimony we will make available to all counselors, and we'll also make sure it gets over to the department. Since I think, you know, obviously the green jobs work is all information, and we want as many inputs into that as possible. Next up, Michael Thomas. Michael.
Good afternoon. Is it afternoon yet? The day's going by so fast, probably morning time. But anyway, hello. My name is Michael Thomas. I am a Boston resident of both Roxbury and Dorchester. I am a landscape artist. I have my own company, the Urban Garden Landscape Services, and I've been working with Dave Quealy, just talking about the issues around permaculture, and also been participating in his class with the Green Infrastructure certification program. And man, it has really opened my mind up to, you know, things that are really, really critical to all the things that you've talked about in terms of just the change of what's going on with the environment, the impact on the just the buildings and just the communities, and then even the opportunities that exist for educating the youth in this field. I think it's unfortunate that, you know, we find ourselves in this crisis situation, but we're so far behind in the education so that we can have people come up to speed and be that cavalry that's going to come over the hill and help us do all these things. And all of us, we are, you know, of ripe age to be able to lead the charge, but we need to prepare those next generations of people in the community to get involved now, because these issues are just going to exacerbate over time. So I'm here and I'm ready, and I thank you for this opportunity. And I'm so glad I met you, Dave, because you know, we got a lot to do. We got a lot to do. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much to you both. And thank you, Michael. Looking forward to having your continuing partnership in this work. I think that's it for public testimony for now. It looks like I don't have anybody else. If you're watching this, you should be getting in the Zoom room right now. But before I gavel out, just I'll just go back to Chief Whitehammond if she wants to say any final words.
No, I just want to say thank you. I have my coat covering my shoulders because I am learning how cold City Hall can be in this transition between winter and the coming of summer. Really just grateful for the opportunity to come before you. Really grateful for the amazing staff we have. Our department, yes, there are spaces where we could do better in terms of retention and support, and we're going to be working on that, but we also have amazing, committed staff who've moved forward so much. I welcome, there are a lot of comments and questions about whether or not we have the resources we need to move everything forward, both in terms of the performance standards and particularly in terms of landmarks. Would love to continue that conversation as we continue figuring out what our work plan is and what we'll need to move that forward. And mostly just really thankful for the attentive questions of the council and looking forward to the many opportunities for partnership going forward. So mostly just deep gratitude for this, my first budget hearing. I thankfully get to do it all over again in about a week, I think. But it's been a good experience.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Yes, and we're definitely grateful to the staff and environment and landmarks, and you know,
the public testimony. Some folks who I do recognize, and we look forward to working with you also, particularly around the Green Jobs Community Advisory Board. We will be putting the application together very quickly because we want to engage in that conversation as soon as possible.
Great, thanks. Yes, and yeah, and then I know on the historic preservation side, Greg mentioned the survey and the backlog, which we obviously discussed a lot today, but that community ombudsman sort of piece, thinking about how we do that outreach, is another piece to put in the hopper. So yeah, and I'll just say for folks watching at home, just so you know, the council, we have budget hearings with a set of major departments that have like sort of larger budgets, which makes sense, right? It's more money, so it needs more scrutiny, but we aren't able to have these hearings with every department that have comparatively smaller budgets. But for the last 2 years, we have made a point of having one with environment specifically. And that's because environment is sort of one of the little engines that could, that although it's a smaller department, the work that it's driving when we think about the sort of trajectory of the city on climate change. And you know, and I would also say the preservation of our historic resources, like these are really big briefs, even though it's a comparatively small department. So just want to say that us having this hearing in the first place is partly a recognition of the importance of the work that you all do. So thank you very much for that. With that, this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee is adjourned. Have a great day.